The hiss of hydraulic doors closing behind him was a sound Ryland Carrick had come to find comfort in. It meant he was home, or at least as close to home as he ever got, being a starbound mechanic. The workshop aboard the repair vessel Ocellon was a blend of organized chaos, rows of half-repaired drone parts, cables snaking across the floor, and an assortment of alien tech that no one could fully understand, let alone fix. Except for Rylan. He wiped the grease from his hands onto his work suit, smudges of oil and grime blending into the faded fabric. Another day, another broken hunk of metal in the vacuum of space. But tonight, something felt different. The distant hum of the ship's engine was more restless, as though the ship itself anticipated something just beyond the horizon. "Captain, we've got something," called Lena, his first mate, from the ship's small, dimly lit cockpit. Her voice carried a tinge of excitement that Ryland hadn't heard in months. It was rare for anything out here on the fringes of explored space to grab their attention. They were far from the bustling hubs of the Galactic Union, patrolling the uncharted regions where derelict ships and discarded tech drifted endlessly. Ryland made his way to the cockpit, a cramped room with only a few seats and a wide view of the stars beyond. Lena sat at the controls, her fingers flying across the dashboard. The navigation system pinged softly, a gentle yet insistent reminder of the anomaly they were picking up. Ryland squinted at the radar. There was a faint signal, distant but steady. "What is it?" Ryland asked, leaning over Lena's shoulder. The screen displayed little more than a pulsating, far off in the black. "Not sure yet," she replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The signal's weak, but it's organic. And mechanical. That's odd, right?" "Almost like a hybrid," Ryland finished, feeling a sudden surge of adrenaline. "Could be an old war relic." The Galactic Union's wars had left behind more than debris. There were legends of creatures, biomechanical war machines engineered by ancient civilizations to fight their battles. Some said they were long extinct, wiped out when their creators vanished. Others claimed a few still drifted through the void, damaged and forgotten, but not dead. "Set a course for it," Ryland ordered, his heart pounding. He had spent his entire career chasing the ghosts of forgotten technology, and this felt like the discovery of a lifetime. His crew might not have shared his obsession, but they trusted him. If Ryland thought it was worth investigating, they followed. The Ocellon's engines hummed to life, and the stars outside shifted as the ship adjusted its trajectory. The crew worked quietly, the familiar routine of preparing for unknown encounters kicking in. Scanners were calibrated, tools were double-checked, and everyone was on edge. They had no idea what they would find. Hours passed as they neared the source of the signal, the ship creeping closer to the unknown. The tension in the air grew thicker. Lena kept her eyes glued to the readings, while Ryland paced back and forth, thinking of all the possible explanations. A derelict ship? A crashed alien craft? Or perhaps something far more mysterious? Finally, the radar pinged again, louder this time, and Lena's voice broke the silence. "We've got visual contact." Ryland rushed to the viewport, his breath catching in his throat as the object came into view. Floating before them in the endless blackness of space was an enormous creature larger than any ship Ryland had ever seen. It was a mix of organic matter and gleaming metal, its massive body scarred and broken in places, as though it had been through countless battles. Long, sleek tendrils of metallic muscle trailed behind it, some frayed and sparking. Its head, or what Ryland assumed was its head, had large, dark eyes, closed as if in eternal slumber. "Is that a Galactan?" Lena whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ship. The stories of the Galactans were older than most civilizations in the galaxy. These creatures, created by a long-forgotten race, were said to be living weapons designed to fight, to destroy, and to protect their masters. No one had seen one in centuries, and most believed them to be mere myths. But here, floating in the dark, was proof. "It's dying," Ryland muttered, stepping closer to the glass. The creature was limp, drifting aimlessly. Its metal exoskeleton flickered with sparks, and strange fluids oozed from organic wounds. But most telling of all was the faint signal it was emitting, a cry for help, too weak for most ships to notice, but just strong enough to be picked up by a mechanic's trained sensors. "Captain, I don't like this," said Jex, one of the crew's senior engineers. "That thing's a war machine. If it wakes up, it could turn on us." Ryland didn't respond immediately. His mind raced, assessing the situation, weighing the risks. He knew Jex was right. This creature, if it regained full power, could tear their ship apart in seconds. But something in him couldn't turn away. This was a living relic of a forgotten time, a piece of history that had somehow survived the chaos of the universe. And it was suffering. "We can't just leave it," Ryland said firmly. "Whatever it is, it's in bad shape. If we don't help, it'll die." "You're talking about repairing a Galactic," Jex replied, incredulous. "That's impossible." Ryland turned to face his crew, determination burning in his eyes. "I'm not asking anyone to stay if they don't want to. But I've spent my entire life fixing things that were deemed impossible. This is no different. I'm going out there." Lena and Jex exchanged a glance. The rest of the crew remained silent, their faces a mix of fear and uncertainty. But they had all followed Ryland long enough to know he wouldn't back down from this. "All right," Lena said, her voice soft but resolute. "We'll get you suited up." Within minutes, Ryland was in his exosuit, preparing for the spacewalk that could make or break everything. As the airlock hissed open, he stepped into the void, tethered to the Ocellon by a slim cable. The vast emptiness of space surrounded him, but his focus was on the massive creature before him. As he approached the Galactic, the scale of it became truly overwhelming. It was like a moon made of metal and flesh, its surface a patchwork of glowing circuits and biological tissues. Ryland's heart raced, but his hands were steady. This was what he lived for, solving problems no one else could. He landed gently on the creature's side, the magnetic grips of his suit anchoring him to its surface. Up close, the damage was even worse than he had imagined. Wires were torn, vital systems were leaking energy, and the creature's organic components were shutting down. Its mechanical parts, once so advanced, now seemed ancient, a relic of a bygone era. Ryland activated his tools, opening a panel near what he assumed was the creature's core. Inside, the machinery was a chaotic tangle of alien technology, a blend of mechanical and biological systems far beyond human understanding. But Ryland had always been good at figuring things out, and he wasn't about to let this creature die. As he worked, the creature stirred slightly, its massive form twitching. Ryland's breath caught in his throat. It was still alive, still aware. The faint hum of its systems reverberated through his suit, almost like a low, mournful song. "I've got you," Ryland whispered, as if the creature could hear him. "You're not alone." Hours passed as Ryland worked tirelessly, his fingers moving with precision and care. He rerouted power, repaired connections, and replaced damaged components with spare parts from his suit. Slowly but surely, the creature's systems began to stabilize. The flickering lights in its body grew steady, and the strange organic fluid stopped leaking. And then, just as he finished sealing the final panel, something extraordinary happened. The creature's massive eyes, dark and lifeless, slowly opened. A deep, glowing blue light emanated from them, filling the space around it. Ryland felt a wave of energy wash over him, as if the creature was awakening from a long, tortured sleep. It looked directly at him, and for a moment, Ryland felt a connection, something deep and primal, as though the creature recognized him. He didn't know how, but he could feel its gratitude, its relief. It wasn't just a machine. It was alive. Ryland floated there, suspended in the void, staring into the eyes of the fearsome Galactic. He had repaired it, brought it back from the brink of death. And now, as it hovered silently in space, he realized something even more incredible. The beast had chosen to follow him. The Galactic floated silently beside the Ocellon, its immense form casting an eerie shadow over the ship. Ryland stood in the cockpit, staring through the viewport at the biomechanical creature he had just brought back to life. His mind raced with questions. How did it survive so long? What purpose had it served? And, perhaps most importantly, why was it still following them? Lena, at the controls, glanced over at Ryland, her eyes betraying her anxiety. "It's still there," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly would awaken the beast fully. "I know," Ryland replied, equally quiet, his gaze locked on the creature. "It doesn't seem aggressive, though." "Yet," Lena countered, her fingers dancing over the console to run another scan. "That thing's the size of a dreadnought, Ryland. If it decides to turn on us, we don't stand a chance." Jex, leaning against the wall with arms crossed, frowned. "We need to get out of here. Now. I've heard stories of creatures like this. They're weapons, designed for war. They don't form alliances. They conquer. Or worse." Ryland ignored him for a moment, still watching the creature. The Galactic's eyes glowed a deep, serene blue, almost hypnotic. Its tendrils, previously limp, now moved slowly, flexing as if testing their strength. It looked calm, but there was an undeniable power in its movements, something ancient and untamed. He turned back to Jex, voice firm. "If it wanted to destroy us, it could have done that by now. But it hasn't." Jex shook his head in disbelief. "Maybe it's just waiting for something, or maybe it's damaged in ways we can't see. But we're out here in uncharted space with a beast that could rip this ship apart with a flick of its tail. You want to trust it? Fine. But that's a gamble I wouldn't take." Ryland clenched his jaw. He understood Jex's fear, but something about this situation felt different. He had worked on machines his whole life, and he knew when a machine was acting erratic or when it had a purpose. The Galactic wasn't acting out of malice or confusion. It had chosen to follow him after he repaired it, and Ryland believed there was a reason for that. "We're not leaving it," Ryland said finally, voice resolute. "It's not a machine or a mindless weapon. I think it's more than that." Lena sighed, but there was no point in arguing. Once Ryland made up his mind, there was no changing it. "All right, Captain," she said, "but we're keeping the weapons charged just in case." Ryland nodded, appreciating her pragmatism. "Fair enough." As the crew monitored the creature's movements, Ryland made his way back to his workshop. The adrenaline of the repair had worn off, but the questions about the Galactic still gnawed at him. He knew he needed more data, more understanding. It wasn't just an anomaly anymore, it was part of his ship's reality. And if it was going to stay near them, he had to find a way to communicate with it. Ryland had always been a tinkerer, someone who saw problems as puzzles waiting to be solved. His workshop was a testament to that. Tools were scattered across every available surface, and the shelves were lined with strange bits of tech he'd salvaged over the years. Some of it was human-made, some of it alien, and most of it unidentifiable to anyone but him. He sat down at his workbench and pulled out a scanner. He needed to analyze the creature's systems to see if there was any way to interface with it. If it was biomechanical, then there had to be some sort of core program, some way of communicating with the mechanical half of its nature. As he worked, hours passed in a blur. He built a makeshift transmitter device that could emit signals on frequencies he hoped the Galactic might recognize. His plan was simple, if risky: send out a signal, see if the creature responded, and try to establish a basic form of communication. If it worked, he might be able to learn what it wanted, or at least why it had chosen to stay with them. Ryland returned to the cockpit with his device in hand. Lena and Jex were still at their posts, both watching the creature cautiously. "I'm going out there again," Ryland said, strapping the device to his suit. Lena looked at him, wide-eyed. "Out there? You've got to be kidding me, Ryland. That thing just woke up. Who knows what it'll do if you get close again?" "That's exactly why I need to go," he replied. I think it's trying to communicate, or at least it's aware of us. I need to see if I can establish a link with it. You're insane, Jex muttered under his breath, but he didn't try to stop him. Rylan didn't wait for more protests. He suited up and headed to the airlock once again. As the doors opened and the cold emptiness of space greeted him, he could see the Galactan hovering near the ship, its massive form still and silent. With a deep breath, Rylan activated the thrusters on his suit and launched toward the creature. His heart pounded in his chest, but his resolve held firm. He had faced dangerous tech before, but nothing quite like this. As he neared the Galactan, he felt its gravitational pull gently tug at him, a reminder of its sheer size and power. He landed softly on its surface, near where he had done the repairs. The creature's metallic skin was cool to the touch, humming with a faint energy. Rylan activated his transmitter and sent out the first signal, a simple, steady pulse, designed to mimic the basic communications used by machines. For a moment, nothing happened. The creature remained still, its blue eyes glowing faintly in the distance. Then, slowly, the surface beneath Rylan's feet began to vibrate. A low hum resonated through the creature, building in intensity. Rylan froze, unsure if it was a warning or a response. Suddenly, the creature's tendrils twitched, and the deep blue glow in its eyes brightened. Rylan's transmitter beeped wildly, picking up a signal, a return pulse, rhythmic and deliberate. The Galactan was responding. Rylan adjusted the frequency of his transmitter, trying to match the creature's signal. As he did, the hum beneath him grew louder, and the creature shifted slightly, as if acknowledging his presence. "It's working," Rylan whispered, feeling a surge of excitement. He had managed to establish some form of communication, even if it was primitive. He sent another pulse, this time altering the pattern to indicate a question, a simple query, friend or foe. For a tense moment, there was silence. Then, the Galactan responded. The pulse that came back was slower, softer, but there was something in it, something Rylan could only describe as intent. The creature wasn't a mindless weapon, it was intelligent. And more importantly, it wasn't hostile. As Rylan stood on the creature's surface, connected through their rudimentary signals, he realized the Galactan was far more than a machine. It was alive in ways he hadn't imagined. It had consciousness, awareness. It had chosen to stay with him because he had helped it. And now, it seemed to recognize him as something more than just a mechanic. Suddenly, the Galactan's tendrils moved with purpose. They curled gently around Rylan, not in an aggressive way, but almost protectively. He could feel the hum of its energy vibrating through his suit, resonating with the transmitter. The creature was learning, adapting. It was forming a connection with him. Rylan's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a machine responding to commands, this was something more profound. The Galactan had bonded with him. "Rylan, you're not going to believe this," Lena's voice crackled through the comms. "The creature, it's following your movements. Like it's mirroring you." Rylan looked down at his suit's display. The Galactan had synced its signals with his. It wasn't just following orders, it was learning from him, responding to him on an instinctual level. "It's not just a weapon," Rylan said, his voice barely audible. "It's alive." He realized then that he had done more than just repair the creature. He had tamed it, earned its trust. And now, as they drifted together in the vastness of space, Rylan understood that this Galactan was no longer a threat. It was an ally. The silence in the cockpit of the Ocelon was thick with tension. Lena's hands hovered over the control panel, her eyes scanning the endless stretch of space beyond the viewport. Rylan stood next to her, watching as the massive Galactan drifted peacefully beside their ship, its mechanical tendrils rippling through the void in slow, graceful movements. It had been a few days since Rylan had established communication with the creature, and the more time he spent with it, the more he understood. The Galactan wasn't just following him, it had bonded with him, recognizing him as a companion, perhaps even as its protector. Its once fearsome presence now felt oddly reassuring. But the peace couldn't last forever. Rylan, Lena said, her voice tight. I've been picking up some strange transmissions. Rylan turned to her, concern flickering in his eyes. What kind of transmissions? Lena's fingers tapped across the console, bringing up a series of coded messages on the screen. They're encrypted, but I've cracked part of it. Word's gotten out, Rylan. Someone's talking about a reawakened Galactan out here, and it's spreading fast. We're not the only ones who know about this thing anymore. Rylan's heart sank. He had known this moment was inevitable. The Galactan was too big, too powerful, to remain unnoticed for long. And now, the galaxy's most dangerous factions were bound to take an interest. A living weapon, capable of unimaginable destruction, was something that every warlord, corporation, and government would want to control or destroy. How far away are they? Rylan asked, his voice steady, but his mind racing. Lena bit her lip. Far enough that we've got time to prepare, but not far enough to avoid them entirely. If we don't come up with a plan soon, they'll be on top of us within the day. Rylan cursed under his breath. He had hoped to learn more about the Galactan before anyone else got involved. But now, with hunters closing in, the situation had shifted from discovery to survival. Jex, standing by the door, arms crossed as usual, chimed in. We should leave. Jump to hyperspace, get as far away from here as we can. That thing is a beacon, Rylan. Every bounty hunter, pirate, and military fleet is going to be on our tail, and we don't stand a chance against them. Rylan shook his head. We can't just run. The Galactan saved our lives. It protected us, and I'm not abandoning it. Jex shot him a frustrated look. It's not one of us. It's a machine and ancient weapon. You think it cares about you, about any of us? As soon as someone figures out how to control it, we're all dead, and so is that thing. Rylan met Jex's gaze, the tension between them thick. I'm not asking anyone to stay if they don't want to. But I'm not leaving it to be hunted like some trophy. This creature is more than a weapon, and I intend to prove it. Lena cut in before the argument could escalate. We don't have much time. If we're going to fight, we need a plan. And we need to figure out how much the Galactan can help us. Rylan nodded. He glanced out the viewport at the creature, which hovered near the ship, its eyes glowing softly. I think it'll fight for us if we need it to. Lena raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? We don't exactly have a lot of experience with, giant space beasts. It's not just a beast, Rylan said, his voice thoughtful. It's smart. I've been able to communicate with it, to some extent. I think it understands more than we realize. Jex scoffed. Great. So now we're relying on a hunch. But Rylan ignored him. His mind was racing, formulating a plan. He knew they couldn't outgun the hunters who were coming for them, but they had one advantage: no one else knew how the Galactan worked. Rylan did. Lena, we're going to use the Galactan as bait, Rylan said, determination in his voice. Bait? Lena repeated, eyes wide. You can't be serious. I am, Rylan said. Everyone's going to be after the creature. They'll focus on it first, thinking they can either capture or disable it. We'll let them think that, while we use the Galactan to strike back. Jex frowned. And how exactly are we supposed to control it? Rylan turned to him, his expression grim. I don't think we need to control it. We just need to show it what's happening. The Galactan isn't a mindless weapon, Jex. It's a protector. I've seen it. It defended us before, and it'll do it again. We just need to guide it. Lena looked skeptical but didn't object. If we're going to try this, we need to figure out how to position ourselves. We can't take a direct hit from any serious firepower. Rylan paced the cockpit, thinking through the strategy. We'll use the nebula up ahead, he said, gesturing toward the star map. Its electromagnetic interference will mess with their sensors. We'll hide the Ocylon there, and when they come for the Galactan, we hit them from the shadows. Jex muttered something under his breath, but finally relented. It's risky, but it might be our best shot. Lena nodded, setting the course. All right, I'll prep the ship. We need to be ready for anything. The crew scrambled into action, preparing the Ocylon for the inevitable encounter. Rylan took one last look at the Galactan through the viewport before heading to his quarters to gather his tools. He had no idea how the creature would respond in the heat of battle, but he had to believe that their bond meant something. The galaxy had always seen the Galactans as weapons of destruction, but Rylan had seen another side of the creature, one that could be more than just a tool for war. Several hours later, the Ocylon floated silently within the nebula, its systems dimmed to avoid detection. Outside, the swirling clouds of gas and electromagnetic storms masked their presence. The Galactan, too large to hide completely, drifted nearby, its eyes glowing faintly in the cosmic fog. The tension on board was palpable. Lena and Jex monitored the sensors while Rylan stood by the viewport, waiting for the inevitable arrival of their pursuers. They're coming, Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm picking up multiple signatures. Ships, some small, some military class. Rylan's heart pounded in his chest. He could see them now, dark shapes moving through the nebula, sleek ships bristling with weapons. These weren't amateurs. They were professional hunters, likely hired by one of the larger corporations or rogue governments. And they were closing in fast. Hold steady, Rylan said quietly, eyes fixed on the approaching ships. Let them come. As the enemy ships drew closer, they began to open fire on the Galactan. Energy blasts lit up the nebula, striking the creature's armored body. The Galactan didn't react immediately, its massive form absorbing the hits like a dormant titan. But Rylan knew that wouldn't last long. Come on, he whispered, willing the creature to act. Fight back. And then, with a sudden, terrifying roar, the Galactan came to life. Its tendrils snapped through space like whips, striking the attacking ships with incredible force. Energy beams erupted from its eyes, cutting through the nebula and vaporizing anything in their path. The once quiet void exploded into chaos as the Galactan unleashed its full fury. Rylan watched in awe as the creature fought, its movements calculated and precise. This wasn't the mindless rage of a machine, it was a deliberate, controlled response. The Galactan was defending itself, but it was also protecting the Ocylon. The attacking ships scrambled to avoid the creature's onslaught, but it was too late. One by one, they were destroyed, their wreckage scattering into the nebula like dust. Those that survived fled, their engines roaring as they retreated into the depths of space. Rylan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The Galactan had won. Lena sat back in her chair, visibly shaken but relieved. We did it. No, Rylan said quietly, his eyes still on the Galactan. It did. The creature floated peacefully once more, its tendrils curling slowly through the void. It had protected them, just as Rylan had hoped. But as the adrenaline of the battle faded, a new realization hit him. This was just the beginning. Word of the Galactan's revival would spread. More would come, stronger, smarter enemies who would stop at nothing to control the creature. And Rylan knew they couldn't run forever. But as he looked out at the Galactan, still glowing softly in the nebula, he felt a sense of determination. We're not done yet, Rylan said, turning to his crew. But we've got something they don't, a Galactan that trusts us. And if we play this right, we might just survive. The hunt had begun, but Rylan wasn't afraid. Because for the first time, he realized that the Galactan wasn't just a weapon. It was a protector. And together, they might just be able to change the fate of the galaxy. The aftermath of the battle left the Ocylon drifting in the nebula, shrouded in the swirling colors of gas clouds. The tension had eased, but an undeniable reality had settled over the crew. They were now fugitives, bound to a creature whose existence had become both their greatest strength and greatest threat. Rylan stood in the dimly lit workshop, his mind replaying the events of the fight. The Galactic had saved them, unleashed its power with surgical precision, and had protected them as though it understood more than he had ever imagined. He had repaired it, yes, but there was something deeper in the bond, now an alliance that went beyond mechanic and machine. The door hissed open behind him, and Lena stepped in, her face a mixture of worry and exhaustion. "We're in the clear for now," she said, leaning against the workbench. "But we both know more are going to come. Those hunters won't be the last." Rylan nodded slowly, still staring at the alien technology scattered on his bench. "We can't run forever. But if we stay and fight, we'll be up against fleets, governments, and corporations. Everyone wants a piece of the Galactic." Lena sighed, pushing her dark hair back. "So, what's the plan, Captain? What do we do with a weapon like that?" "It's not a weapon," Rylan said, almost defensively. He glanced up at Lena, his expression softening. "It's something more. I can feel it. The Galactic, it's alive, aware in ways we don't fully understand yet. It didn't fight for us because it was programmed to. It fought because it chose to." Lena crossed her arms, thoughtful. "If that's true, then it's more than a weapon. It's a sentient being. But that just makes it more valuable to the wrong people." Rylan's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. They couldn't keep running, but the galaxy would never stop hunting them if they didn't find a way to change the narrative. They needed allies, and they needed to uncover the truth behind the Galactic, why it was created, and what its real purpose had been. "I've been thinking," Rylan said, his voice steady. "We need to get out of Union space. Head to the Outer Rim." Lena raised an eyebrow. "The Outer Rim? You want to leave known space?" "Exactly," Rylan said. "The Union's too focused on control, on power. We need to find the places that aren't under their thumb, the places that are free. The Galactic was built to protect something. I think we need to find out what that something is. And I think the answers are out there, beyond the reach of the Union." Lena seemed to consider his words for a long moment, then gave a small, reluctant smile. "Well, I always did say you were crazy. Looks like I was right." Rylan chuckled softly, feeling a weight lift slightly from his shoulders. "Crazy, maybe. But this thing, it's the key to something bigger. We're not just running anymore. We're searching for answers." A soft chime from the ship's comms interrupted their conversation, and Jex's voice crackled through. "Rylan, you might want to get up here. We've got company." Rylan and Lena exchanged a quick look before rushing out of the workshop and back to the cockpit. When they arrived, the scene outside the viewport was one of strange beauty. 3 small ships, sleek and nimble, hovering just outside the nebula, their lights flickering through the fog. These weren't Union ships or hunters, they were something else. "Pirates?" Lena asked, narrowing her eyes. "Not sure," Jex replied, keeping his hands on the controls. "They're not opening fire, though. Seems like they want to talk." Rylan felt a knot of tension coil in his chest. Whoever these newcomers were, they had found the Ocellon too easily. But something told him this encounter wasn't like the others. He reached for the comms, opening a channel to the ships. "This is Rylan Carrick, captain of the Ocellon. State your purpose." A moment of static filled the cabin, then a calm, gravelly voice responded. "Rylan Carrick. We've heard of you. We're not here to fight. We represent a faction that's been watching the movements around the Galactic. You've made quite a name for yourself, reviving it. We'd like to speak." Lena gave Rylan a questioning look. He nodded and replied, "Who are you?" There was a brief pause, and then the voice returned, steady and confident. "We are the Free Stars Alliance. We operate beyond the reach of the Galactic Union, on the Outer Rim. We've been monitoring your situation, and we believe we can help each other. Ryland's heart skipped a beat. The Outer Rim, the very place he had just been contemplating. What kind of help are you offering? The kind that ensures neither of us ends up in the crosshairs of Union bounty hunters or corporate fleets, the voice said. We've seen how you've handled the Galactic. We know it's not just a weapon to you, and that's why we're extending this offer. Meet with us. Hear us out. You'll find we're not so different. Ryland glanced at Lena and Jex. The risk was undeniable. This could be a trap, or it could be the break they needed. The Free Stars Alliance wasn't widely known, but rumors painted them as a group of independent colonies and fleets that had rejected the Union's rule, seeking freedom on the fringes of space. If they were genuine, they might be the only allies Ryland had left. Where's the meeting? Ryland asked, after a long pause. Head to the planet Lyra 4, the voice said. You'll find us there. But come quickly. The Union's closing in on this sector. The transmission cut out, leaving Ryland and his crew in a tense silence. Jex sighed, running a hand through his short hair. This is insane. We don't know who these people are. For all we know, they could be setting us up for a trap. Maybe, Ryland said quietly. But if we keep running without a plan, we'll be dead before we get any answers. The Galactic is more than just a relic. It has a purpose, and I'm not going to figure it out on my own. We need allies. Lena nodded, her voice firm. We've survived this long by trusting each other. I say we take the risk. We need a way forward, and maybe these Free Stars can give us one. Jex shook his head, exasperated but unwilling to argue further. Fine. But if this goes sideways, don't say I didn't warn you. Ryland smiled, appreciating the loyalty of his crew even in the face of such uncertainty. We'll be careful. But I think this is the break we've been waiting for. The Ocellon set course for Lyra 4, the planet the Free Stars had mentioned. As they traveled, Ryland spent every spare moment studying the Galactic, its systems, its responses, its strange blend of organic and mechanical processes. He had been right all along. The creature wasn't just a weapon. It had layers of complexity that went beyond anything the galaxy had seen in millennia. As they approached Lyra 4, the planet's surface came into view, an expanse of deserts and jagged mountain ranges, dotted with colonies and outposts. The Ocellon was guided toward a landing zone on the outskirts of a sprawling, independent city. Small ships flitted around them, their markings bearing no resemblance to the Union's strict military designs. The moment they touched down, Ryland felt the weight of their journey settle over him. They had survived the Galactic Union, bounty hunters, and unknown enemies to get here. But as he stepped off the Ocellon and saw the figures approaching the leaders of the Free Stars Alliance, he knew their real mission was just beginning. The Galactic floated in orbit above the planet, a silent guardian watching over them. As the leader of the Free Stars approached, a tall, withered woman with piercing green eyes, she extended her hand to Ryland. Welcome to the Free Stars, Captain Carrick, she said, her voice firm but warm. We've been waiting for someone like you. Ryland took her hand, a sense of destiny settling over him. Let's talk, he replied. We have a lot to discuss.